The camera didn't catch everything. It caught enough. At 7:14 on a Tuesday morning in the service corridor behind the 41st floor kitchen of Meridian Group's flagship tower on Wacker Drive, a man in a white cook's uniform carried a covered plate down 6 flights of stairs, through the loading dock exit, and set it on the concrete ledge beside the service entrance. He did not look around first. He did not hesitate. He simply set the plate down, adjusted the aluminum foil once so the wind wouldn't take it, and turned back toward the elevator without a word. The man who picked it up wore a coat that had once been good, brown wool, double-breasted, the kind of coat that suggested a different life. He sat on an overturned milk crate and ate with both hands wrapped around the plate for warmth. He ate slowly, like a man who knew how to be grateful. 18 minutes later, the security footage was pulled, reviewed, time-stamped, forwarded to a laptop with a clean signature at the bottom of the email, Dmitry Volkov, Director of Operations. 40 minutes after that, the cook was called upstairs. He went without being told twice. His name was Marcus Hale. He was 43 years old, 6 feet even, the kind of man who took up exactly as much space as he needed and not an inch more. He had been the head breakfast cook on the 41st floor executive kitchen at Meridian Group for 3 years, 2 months and 11 days. He knew this not because he was counting, but because that was the date his daughter Lily had started her 3rd round of treatment at Lurie Children's Hospital, and he had taken the job the same week, so the hours would let him be at her bedside by 5 in the evening without explaining himself to anyone. The job paid $24.60 an hour. He had once commanded a salary of $340,000 per year. He did not think about this often. When he did not call it sacrifice. He called it math. The numbers added up to the same thing they always did. Lily needed him present. Everything else was arithmetic. The 41st floor kitchen was a precise, gleaming space, 12 induction burners, a Viking range imported from France at a cost Marcus had once been in a position to approve. The refrigeration system maintained 7 distinct temperature zones. Marcus knew all 7. He had memorized them his 2nd week and had never needed to write them down. He arrived every morning at 5:45. Not at 5:46, not at 5:44. He would change into his whites in the staff locker room on the service floor, tying his apron with a particular fold at the left hip that no one had taught him and no one had asked about. He would wash his hands twice, not once. He would check the massey in place the overnight prep team had left, correct whatever needed correcting without leaving a note, and have the first breakfast service components ready before any other kitchen staff arrived. He did not do these things to be noticed. He had simply decided on his first day what the job required, and he had done it every day since. The other kitchen staff called him Mr. Hale behind his back, not to mock him, but because something in the way he moved insisted on it. He was not unfriendly. He was not warm in the way that fills a room. He was warm in the way that a good coat is warm, quietly, reliably, without asking to be thanked for it. His locker contained a photograph of Lily at age 7 at Navy Pier, her face lit up orange from a funnel cake, a spare apron, folded, a small tin of Vaseline for his hands which cracked in the dry tower air every winter, a library book. This month it was a collection of Chekhov's short stories, the cover soft from use. On the inside of his locker door, written in his own hand on a strip of masking tape, were 6 words. "She needs you whole, not broken." He had written it the night after Lily's first diagnosis 5 years ago, when he had stood in his kitchen at midnight holding a glass of scotch he never drank. He had put the glass in the sink. He had found a pen, and he had decided something. He wore a watch that had belonged to his father. A Seiko 5, silver-toned, with a crack across the crystal that he'd had repaired twice and refused to replace. It kept perfect time. He checked it rarely. He seemed to know what time it was without looking. His hands were the kind of hands that told you everything about a man if you looked. Large, capable. The knuckles on his right hand slightly larger than the left from an old injury he'd never fully explained to anyone at Meridian. A small burn scar on the inside of his left wrist, pale and old, from a kitchen accident 17 years ago when he had been working a very different kitchen in a very different life. He had been, for 11 years, the executive chef at Harrow & Associates, a private consulting firm that operated at the intersection of architecture, urban infrastructure, and government contract work. He had built the culinary program there from a conference room with a hot plate into a 3-kitchen operation serving 400 people daily across 2 buildings. He had designed the menu systems, sourced the vendors, trained 22 cooks, and overseen a food services budget of $2.2 million annually. He had also, before that, spent 4 years as a logistics officer in the United States Army 18th Airborne Corps, where he had learned that feeding people under pressure was not a soft skill. It was a command decision. Everything downstream from a hungry man was unpredictable. But no one on the 41st floor knew any of this. They knew he made the best hollandaise sauce in the building, that his soft scrambled eggs had become something the senior partners mentioned by name in conversations that had nothing to do with food, that he arrived before everyone and left on time every evening without exception, pausing only to hang his whites neatly and retrieve his jacket from the locker, a gray wool blazer slightly worn at the elbows, that he put on with the same deliberateness with which he had tied his apron 12 hours before. He had given food to the man in the brown coat 3 times before the Tuesday that ended everything. The first time had been accidental, or nearly so. A breakfast service had been canceled at the last minute, a meeting pushed back, 12 full plates untouched. Marcus had stood in the kitchen looking at 12 plates of food that would go in the compost bin and had made a decision in approximately 4 seconds. He had carried them down himself rather than ask the younger staff to do something that might cost them something. The second time it had been intentional. He had made a full extra plate not from leftovers, from the same ingredients the 41st floor received, the same smoked salmon, the same creme fraiche, the same dill brought in fresh on Tuesdays from a farm in Wisconsin. The third time he had asked nothing of anyone, he had simply done it. He had not asked the man's name. The man in the brown coat had never offered it. There was an unspoken agreement between them that operated entirely on the frequency of human dignity and required no words to maintain. What Marcus did not know, what he could not have known, was that Dmitry Volkov had been watching. Not the man in the coat. He did not know anything about the man in the coat. What Dmitry Volkov had been watching was Marcus Hale, and Dmitry Volkov was not the kind of man who watched things without a purpose. Dmitry Volkov had been at Meridian Group for 7 years. He was 38 years old. He had a jaw that seemed engineered for confidence and a handshake that was always precisely 1 second longer than necessary. He wore shirts from a tailor on Michigan Avenue and kept a framed photograph of himself with the governor of Illinois on the wall of his office, positioned so it was the first thing anyone saw upon entering. He was, by every measurable metric, successful. He was also, by the most important unmeasurable metric, afraid. Not of failure. Men like Dmitry Volkov do not fear failure, they fear being seen clearly. There is a difference. He had been afraid for approximately 8 months. Since the afternoon, he had overheard 2 senior partners discussing the renovation of the 41st floor executive dining program, and the words outside consultant had entered the conversation. Since the moment he had understood that if Meridian brought in someone to evaluate the food services operation, they would find something Dmitry could not explain away. Specifically, $84,000 in vendor contracts that had been routed quietly through a shell company Dmitry had established in Delaware in 2021. He needed someone to watch. He needed someone whose removal would create no suspicion, generate no sympathy from above, and, most importantly, displace any investigation of kitchen finances into a personnel matter rather than an accounting matter. Marcus Hale was, for these purposes, perfect. He was a contract employee, he was quiet, he kept to himself, he was liked but not beloved by the kind of people who made noise, and Dmitry had noticed this from the beginning, a habit of bringing food downstairs to the loading dock on certain mornings. All Dmitry had needed was to wait, and to make sure the camera in the service corridor, which pointed generally toward the elevator bank, had its angle adjusted 4 degrees to the left sometime in late September. Adjusted by a facilities contractor Dmitry had authorized. The adjustment had been logged as a routine security calibration. It was not routine. It pointed directly at the concrete ledge beside the service entrance. What Dmitry had told Diana Chen, CEO of Meridian Group, was this: that Marcus Hale had been systematically removing executive-grade food from the kitchen for personal use, that the footage was clear, that the value of the food items was, and here he had paused just long enough for the pause to do its work, significant, that he had confirmed this with the vendor invoices, that he felt it was his obligation to bring it to her attention before it became a liability. He had not said, "I think we should fire him." He had said, "I'll leave it to your judgment, Diana, I just couldn't stay silent." These were the words of a careful man. Diana Chen was 51 years old. She had built Meridian Group from a 12-person consultancy into a $600 million infrastructure firm over 19 years. She was sharp. She was principled. She was also, in the month of October in this particular year, running on 4 hours of sleep per night, managing a proposed merger with a New York development group, navigating a talent crisis in the engineering division, and attempting to salvage a $47 million federal contract that had developed what her legal team called complications. She was the kind of tired that doesn't look tired, the kind that holds its shape through willpower alone until the willpower runs out. Dimitri had brought her the footage on a morning when her EA had called in sick, her 10 o'clock had run long, and she had not eaten since the previous evening. He had set a tablet on her desk. He had played the footage. He had not said anything while she watched. What Diana Chen saw on that screen, a cook in white carrying a plate, leaving it for a man who appeared to be living outside. What she felt watching it was not what Dimitri had hoped she would feel. She felt something complicated, something that did not translate cleanly into outrage. But then Dimitri had said the words vendor invoice discrepancy and liability in the same sentence, and her tired mind had connected dots in the way that tired minds do, quickly and in straight lines and without pausing to check the geometry. She had said, "Handle it appropriately." She had not said, "Fire him." But Dmitry Volkov heard what he needed to hear. The meeting happened in a glass-walled conference room on the 41st floor at 8:49 on a Tuesday morning. Present: Dmitry Volkov, Helena Marsh, HR Director Marcus Hale. Marcus sat with both hands on the table, flat, palms down. He had not been told what the meeting was about. He had been called upstairs between services and told to bring nothing. He brought nothing. Dmitry opened a manila folder. He slid a printed still from the security footage across the table, then a second sheet, then a vendor reconciliation document that Marcus had never seen before and would not have recognized as fabricated without time to examine it carefully. He examined it anyway. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he said, "That's not what happened." His voice was level, not raised, not tight, simply factual in the way that a compass is factual when it points north regardless of whether you want to go there. Dmitry said, "The footage is timestamped, Marcus." Marcus said, "I know what the footage shows. I'm telling you what happened." Dmitry said, "We appreciate your years of service, but given the nature of..." Marcus said, "I gave him breakfast. From the surplus plate I cooked with my own hands on my own time. I didn't take anything." There was a silence. Helena Marsh looked at the table. Dmitry Volkov said, "I understand this is difficult." Marcus said nothing for a moment. He looked at the vendor document again. He looked at it in the particular way of a man who has managed budgets and understood in approximately 30 seconds exactly what the document was designed to do and exactly who had designed it. He did not say this. He folded his hands together. He looked at Dmitry Volkov directly without expression for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "All right." He signed the separation agreement that Helena slid across the table. He did not read it. He had already understood everything it contained. He stood, he straightened his jacket. He said to no one in particular, "The hollandaise for tomorrow's service needs to rest covered overnight or the texture won't hold. Someone should know that." Then he left. He went to his locker. He took the photograph of Lily. He took the Chekhov. He left the tin of Vaseline for whoever came next. He took his jacket off its hook. He folded it over his arm. He did not slam the locker. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the lobby. He rode down 41 floors in a silence that was entirely his own. Outside on Wacker Drive, the October air was cold enough to see your breath. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He looked up at the tower. He put on his jacket. He called Lily's care coordinator at Lurie and adjusted his afternoon visit time to 2 o'clock instead of 5. Then he walked to the parking structure and drove away. He did not know what was beginning to happen behind him as he left. At 9:03 a.m., 14 minutes after Marcus Hale had walked out of the building, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the Meridian Group lobby entrance on Wacker Drive. It was not scheduled. It was not in the building's visitor management system. The man who stepped out wore a coat that had once been good, brown wool, double-breasted. Except today, beneath it, he wore a suit, charcoal gray, impeccably fitted, a white shirt with no tie, cufflinks that caught the light without seeking it. He told the lobby attendant his name. The lobby attendant, a 24-year-old named Kevin Osai, who had worked the desk for 8 months and prided himself on knowing every name that came through the building, felt something he would later describe to his girlfriend as like the air pressure changed. The name was Thomas Whitfield. Thomas Whitfield was 67 years old. He was the founder and chairman emeritus of Whitfield Capital Partners, a private infrastructure investment firm that managed $4.1 billion in assets, with significant positions in urban development, municipal logistics, and as of a restructuring the previous quarter, corporate food services infrastructure, which was a category that did not exist as a line item in any portfolio before Whitfield Capital had decided to make it one. He had been, for the past 4 years, largely retired from public visibility. He had been, for the past 3 months, quietly evaluating Meridian Group as the anchor investment in a $200 million infrastructure fund that Whitfield Capital was preparing to announce. He had told no one at Meridian Group that he was coming today. He had simply come. He asked to speak with Diana Chen. He was shown to a waiting room on the 42nd floor. He sat. He did not check his phone. He looked out the window at Lake Michigan. He had the particular stillness of a man who has stopped needing to perform patience and simply has it. Diana's EA, who had returned from sick leave at 8:50, 1 minute after Marcus Hale had been walked out, appeared in Diana's doorway at 9:11 with an expression that would have been funny under different circumstances. She said, "Thomas Whitfield is here." Diana Chen looked up from a document. She said, "I'm sorry." Her EA said, "He's upstairs. He says he'd like a conversation. No agenda, just a conversation." Diana took exactly 4 seconds to process this information. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and went upstairs. 45 minutes later, the conversation was going well. Thomas Whitfield was a precise and pleasant man. He asked good questions. He listened to answers without interrupting. He had a way of pausing before he spoke that made everything he said feel considered rather than calculated. He had already indicated, without committing to anything on paper, that Whitfield Capital's interest in Meridian was serious and near-term. Diana was doing everything right. The number $200 million had not been spoken aloud, but it was in the room, present and warm, like a fire that no one had officially lit. Then Thomas Whitfield looked at the window. He said, "This building has extraordinary views. Do you use this floor for executive hospitality?" Diana said, "We do. We have a full executive kitchen on 41, chef-prepared breakfast service, working lunches for senior leadership." She stopped herself because something shifted in Thomas Whitfield's expression, not dramatically, not the way a change of weather shifts a face, more like the way a room changes when someone opens a window they didn't know was closed. He said, "Chef prepared, who is your chef?" Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Carla Reyes was having the worst morning of her 2 years at Meridian Group. Carla was 26 years old. She was the second most junior member of the 41st floor kitchen staff, which in practical terms meant she had spent most of her time here learning everything she knew from watching Marcus Hale work without ever being told she was learning anything. She had arrived at 8:45 to find the kitchen empty of Marcus. She had found a brief, handwritten note tucked under the edge of the stainless prep counter, not addressed to anyone in particular. Hollandaise needs overnight rest covered. Salmon should be plated last. The Wisconsin dill arrives Thursday morning. Confirm delivery with loading dock by 8 a.m. or it misses the service window. Take care of them. That was all. She had stood holding the note for a moment. She had understood immediately that Marcus was not coming back. She did not know why. She had looked at the kitchen, her kitchen now, apparently, and felt the specific sensation of standing in a space that was larger than it had been 5 minutes ago in all the wrong ways. At 9:47 a.m., she received a call from the concierge desk on 42. They needed a breakfast service sent up. Light, coffee, fruit, pastries, nothing cooked. A guest was present. She prepared it herself. She took it up. She was shown into the anteroom outside the meeting room to set up a service table. Through the glass partition, she could see two people sitting across from each other. A woman in a navy blazer she recognized as Diana Chen, and a man she did not recognize, in a gray suit with a brown coat folded over the chair beside him. She looked at the coat for 2 full seconds. Then she looked at the man's hands, the way they were folded on the table, the particular stillness of them. She set down the coffee tray. She walked back to the elevator. She rode down to 41. She stood in the empty kitchen for a moment, looking at the counter where Marcus's note was still lying. She picked up her phone. She did not have Marcus's personal number. She had never needed it. She looked for 30 seconds and found it on an internal staff contact sheet that had not yet been updated. She called. He picked up on the second ring. She said, "Mr. Hale, I'm not sure how to say this. The man you give breakfast to, the man downstairs, he's upstairs with Ms. Chen. He's wearing a different coat, but I think it's him. He has the same." She stopped. She said, "I thought you should know." There was a pause. Marcus said, "What's his name?" She said, "I didn't hear it, but they're asking about the kitchen, about who the chef is." Another pause. He said, "All right." He said, "You're doing fine up there, Carla." He hung up. Upstairs, Thomas Whitfield was saying, "The reason I ask is that I had a remarkable meal, in a remarkable context." Diana said, "I'm sorry, when were you here?" He said, "I wasn't, not officially." He paused. "I've been going through a period of evaluation, personal and professional. I find that you learn things about organizations by observing them from positions they don't know you're occupying." Diana said carefully, "I see." He said, "I've been staying in temporary accommodation near the building for the past 3 weeks, evaluating the neighborhood, the foot traffic, the culture of the block, and on 3 separate mornings a man in a white cook's uniform came down from your service entrance and left a meal for me on the ledge. A full, properly plated meal. The same quality I used to receive at the Ritz-Carlton Chicago, which I've been a regular guest of for 30 years. Diana Chen's hands were very still on the table. He continued, "He never asked who I was. He never spoke to me beyond what was necessary. He simply fed me with the same care he presumably fed your senior partners. I found this noteworthy. The character of an institution reveals itself in the behavior of its people when they don't believe they're being watched." Diana said, "Mr. Whitfield." He said, "I'd like to meet him if that's possible. I find I make better decisions about where I invest when I understand who the people are." Diana Chen looked at him. She said, "I'll find out if he's available." She excused herself. She walked to her office. She closed the door. She called Dmitry Volkov. She said, "What exactly did Marcus Hale do?" There was a brief pause that Dmitry filled with a sentence about vendor discrepancies and liability. Diana said, "Did he take food for personal use or did he give it to someone else?" Dmitry began a sentence. Diana said, "Don't give me the document. Tell me what the camera showed." Silence. Diana Chen was not a woman who permitted long silences. She said, "Dmitry, the footage shows him leaving food for a person experiencing homelessness." Dmitry said, "The vendor invoice." She said, "Pull the original purchasing records for the last 6 months. Every vendor, every invoice, have them on my desk by noon." She hung up. She sat for a moment. She looked at her own reflection in the darkened screen of her computer. She did not recognize the expression on her face. She looked at it for a long time. Then she called her EA. She said, "Find me Marcus Hale's home address." At 10:14 a.m., downstairs in the 41st floor kitchen, Carla Reyes was making coffee and trying to hold the service schedule together with the focused desperation of someone defusing a bomb they had not been trained for, when Dmitry Volkov walked in and began looking through the kitchen's vendor files. He did not explain himself. He opened the filing cabinet where the physical invoices were kept. He flipped through them quickly. He was looking for something specific, and he was looking with the particular speed of a man trying to reach a document before someone else does. He did not find what he was looking for because it was not there. What was there, tucked inside the back sleeve of the October vendor folder, was a folded sheet of paper that Marcus had placed there 4 weeks ago and forgotten, or rather not forgotten, but set aside for a moment when it might be relevant. It was a handwritten comparison of the current vendor invoices against the publicly listed rates of the 3 suppliers Dmitry had switched the kitchen to in 2023. The numbers didn't match, not by a little, by $6,200 per month every month for 17 months. Marcus had noticed. He had said nothing. He had written it down. He had put it away. He had been raised to document things rather than argue about them. Carla watched Dmitry go through the folder. She watched him find the sheet of paper. She watched his face do something she had no word for. She memorized what she saw. When Dmitry left, she took a photograph of the paper with her phone before she put it back exactly where she'd found it. She sent it to no one yet. She simply saved it. She was 26 years old and she had grown up watching people in positions of authority handle information, and she had learned something about when to move and when to wait. She waited. By 11:30 a.m., she would not have to wait much longer. Marcus Hale lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bucktown on the 2nd floor of a 3-flat with a brick facade and a landlord who fixed things without being asked twice. The apartment was clean in the way of someone who had made neatness a practice rather than a standard. There was nothing decorative on the walls except the photograph of Lily at Navy Pier, now transferred from his locker, and a framed topographic survey map of Chicago's water infrastructure that had no explanation for visitors who noticed it. He had been home for 2 hours. He had called Lily's oncology coordinator and confirmed the 2 o'clock visit. He had eaten a bowl of rice with a fried egg and read 40 pages of Chekhov without retaining them particularly. He had sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and written down everything he remembered about the vendor discrepancy, in the precise numerical way of a man who had once prepared budget presentations for government contracts, and understood that memory was only as useful as the record you made of it. He had not called anyone. He had not posted anything. He had not told the story to the part of himself that wanted to be angry about it. He was 43 years old. He had been angry before. He had learned, somewhere around age 37, that anger spent itself faster than it produced results. He was reviewing his legal pad when he heard a car on the street below. He did not look out the window. He heard the car door. He heard the entry buzzer a minute later. His intercom crackled. A voice said, "Mr. Hale, this is Diana Chen." He looked at the intercom for a moment. He pressed the button. He said, "Third door on the left." He closed his legal pad. He stood. He straightened his shirt. He did not put his jacket on, not because he was making a statement, but because the apartment was warm and he was at home. He opened the door before she knocked. She looked smaller here than she did on the 41st floor. Not physically, Diana Chen was a composed and upright woman at every altitude. But outside the tower, without the glass in the corner office and the framing of her authority, she looked like what she was. A 51-year-old woman who had driven herself across the city on a Tuesday morning to knock on the door of a man she had wronged without knowing she was doing it, and was now standing in a hallway holding the wrong expression for the occasion. She said, "May I come in?" He stepped back. He gestured toward the kitchen table. She sat. She looked at the legal pad on the table. She did not look away from it quickly enough to pretend she hadn't seen it. He put the kettle on without asking. He brought 2 cups. He sat. She said, "I owe you an explanation and an apology." He said, "All right." She said, "I acted on incomplete information. I was told, I was led to believe that what you were doing was a form of misappropriation. I didn't investigate carefully enough. I should have." He said nothing. She said, "Thomas Whitfield is upstairs, in my building. He may be the most significant investor this firm has engaged in 9 years. and he spent the last 3 weeks living near the building specifically to evaluate us. And the one thing that has influenced his view of Meridian Group is you." Marcus looked at his coffee cup. She said, "I understand that what I'm about to ask is considerable, given the circumstances, given what happened this morning. I want you to come back." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because Thomas Whitfield wants to meet you, and I want to be honest with you, Mr. Hale, you were removed from this company through a process that was not what it appeared to be. I pulled the vendor records this morning. My EA is with legal right now. The situation with the invoices is not a situation you created." Something moved across Marcus's face, not surprise, something quieter than surprise, the look of a man who had already known the shape of a thing and was now simply seeing it confirmed. He said, "I know." She said, "I know you know." There was a pause. She said, "Will you come back?" He looked at his legal pad. He looked at the photograph of Lily on the wall. He said, "I'll come back, but I need to say what that means." She said, "Tell me." He said, "I come back to the same position, same terms, no promotion, no ceremony. I don't want a title change." She said, "Of course." He said, "The kitchen staff, Carla, James, the prep team, they stay, no changes. They ran service this morning without me. They deserve credit for that." She said, "Done." He said, "The vendor contracts get reviewed by someone outside the current operations structure. That's not my condition, that's just what has to happen." She said, "That's already in motion." He said, "And I leave at 5 every day. That's not new, but it needs to be understood." She said, "I understand." He said, "I'm going to see my daughter at 2. I can be at the building by 4, if that's too late for whatever's needed today." She said, "It's not too late." He looked at her. He seemed to be determining something, not about her character, that reading had been done and stored somewhere, but about something more practical, whether the thing she was offering was real. She met his eyes. She did not add anything. She had said everything she came to say, and she had the wisdom to let it sit without decorating it. He said, "I'll be there at 4. She nodded. She stood. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She looked at the map on his wall, the water infrastructure survey. Her eyes moved across it with the particular focus of someone who recognizes what they're looking at. She said, almost to herself, "Structural load analysis. You map the distribution nodes." He said, "Old habit." She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. She said, "What did you do before?" He said, "I made breakfast." She did not press. She understood she was not being rebuffed. She was being told in the language he used that the history was his and the present was what mattered. She said, 4 o'clock. He said, 4 o'clock. She left. He heard her steps on the stairs. He heard the car door. He looked at the legal pad. He tore off the page with the numbers on it. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he went to get his coat. He was going to see Lily. There were 2 hours and 40 minutes before visiting time, enough time to get there early, which he always did, because she liked it when he was already there when she woke up from her midday rest. She said it made her feel like the room was full even before she opened her eyes. He drove north on the Kennedy with the radio off. He did not think about Meridian Group. He did not think about Thomas Whitfield or Dmitry Volkov or the vendor invoices. He thought about what he would tell her today. He thought about Chekhov. He thought about whether she would be up for a walk in the atrium if her counts were good, the way they'd done last Thursday, moving slowly past the big windows with the lake visible in the distance. He thought about her face at Navy Pier in the photograph, the orange light, how she had turned to him with powdered sugar on her nose and said with complete certainty, "This is the best day." He drove. He arrived at the building at 3:58 p.m. He did not announce this. He took the service elevator to 41. He changed into his whites in the locker room. He tied his apron with the particular fold at the left hip. He washed his hands, twice. He walked into the kitchen. Carla Reyes was at the prep counter. She looked up. She opened her mouth. She closed it. He said, "How did the morning service go?" She said, "We managed." He said, "Good." He looked at the counter. The salmon was plated last. She said, "Yes." He said, "Good." He began prep for the dinner service that the 41st floor would require tomorrow, a working breakfast for 14 people in conjunction with what Diana's EA had described when she'd sent him the schedule as an investment partnership meeting. He worked quietly and without explanation. He had a way of moving in the kitchen that organized the space around him by example rather than instruction. James, the senior line cook, arrived for his afternoon shift at 4:15. He walked into the kitchen, saw Marcus, and stopped completely for 2 seconds. Then he said, "All right then," in a tone that closed a chapter, and tied his apron. By 4:45, the kitchen was working as it had always worked, smoothly, without drama, with the specific efficiency of people who know their roles and trust the person running the room. At 4:52, Carla approached Marcus at the range. She was holding her phone. She showed him the photograph she had taken of the document from the vendor folder. He looked at it for a moment. He said, "You took this morning." She said, "Yes. Should I give it to someone?" He said, "Yes." He looked at it once more. "Give it to Helena Marsh, in person, not by email. Tell her exactly where you found it and when." Carla said, "Is that enough?" He said, "It's more than enough." She came back 12 minutes later. She said nothing. She picked up her knife and went back to work. At 5:14 p.m., Diana Chen appeared at the kitchen doorway. Behind her was Thomas Whitfield. The kitchen continued its work. No one stopped. Marcus noticed the doorway without turning from the range. He noted the sound of 2 sets of footsteps that paused at the threshold. He noted the quality of the pause. Then he set down what he was holding, wiped his hands on his apron cloth, and turned. Thomas Whitfield was looking at the kitchen with the expression of a man who has spent a great deal of time in rooms and knows which ones mean something. His eyes moved to Marcus. Marcus walked to the doorway. He did not remove his apron. He did not present himself. He simply walked over and stood in the space where someone was expected. He said, "Mr. Whitfield." Thomas Whitfield said, "I thought it might be you." He put out his hand. Marcus shook it. Thomas said, "You made me eggs on 3 consecutive Tuesdays." Marcus said, "I did." Thomas said, "Best eggs I've had in 20 years, and I have eaten in considerable places." Marcus said, "Good eggs are about temperature, and not asking too much of them." Thomas Whitfield looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me something. Why did you do it? Bring it down yourself. I mean, you could have sent anyone." Marcus said, "I was there. The food was made." Thomas said, "That's all." Marcus said, "That's all." Thomas nodded slowly. He looked at the kitchen behind Marcus, the line of cooks working in their careful choreography, Carla at the prep counter, James at the secondary range, the immaculate organization of a kitchen that ran like a system someone had designed with care and then made invisible. He said, "You designed this kitchen." It was not a question. Marcus said, "I organized it." Thomas said, "There's a difference." Marcus said, "One of them takes credit." Thomas Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that Diana Chen had not seen him do in the 3 hours they had spent together that morning. He smiled, not for the room, for himself, the smile of a man who has found something he was not sure still existed. He said, "I'd like to have a conversation with you sometime, not today, not about anything official, just a conversation." Marcus said, "All right." Thomas said, "I'll have my office send something." He turned to Diana. He said, "Dinner next week, we can talk about the rest." The rest meant $200 million. It meant a partnership term sheet. It meant 3 years of Whitfield capital anchoring an infrastructure fund that would make the federal contract complications look like a footnote. Diana said, "We'll be ready." Thomas Whitfield nodded once. He put his coat on, the brown wool, double-breasted, and walked toward the elevator. The kitchen kept moving. 2 days later at 8:00 a.m. on a Thursday, Diana Chen called a floor meeting on 41. Not in the boardroom, in the kitchen. She stood in the kitchen, which she had not stood in before, not in 19 years of running the company. She stood with the fluorescent light overhead and the smell of good coffee and the sound of the refrigeration units. 14 people. She said what she had to say. She said that a mistake had been made. She did not distribute the blame to the institutional process or to incomplete information. She said, I made a mistake. She said Marcus Hale had been removed from his position on false grounds, and that this had been wrong, and that it would not have been corrected without the actions of people on this team who had done the right thing even when it cost them something. She looked at Carla when she said this. Carla looked at her prep counter. Diana said, I am grateful. She said it once. She did not repeat it or embroider it. Then she said, Marcus. He was standing at the back of the group because he had arrived before anyone and positioned himself near the range where he had work to do. He said, yes. She said, is there anything you'd like to say? He thought for a moment. He said, the Wisconsin dill arrived. It's on the side counter. Thursday's service should be straightforward if everyone knows their station. He paused. These are good people. I want that to be in the record somewhere. He looked at the kitchen staff briefly, in the way of someone taking a quiet inventory. Then he said, we have 14 covers for breakfast at 7:45. We should get started. They got started. Dmitry Volkov was gone by Friday. Not dramatically, not escorted by anyone. He cleared his office between 7 and 9 p.m. on Thursday evening, which the building cameras recorded and which the HR department noted in his file without ceremony. The vendor contracts were reviewed by an outside auditor that Diana engaged through a firm she had used in a previous company. The review took 11 days. The findings were 12 pages long. The $84,000 was a rounding error compared to the exposure it had created. None of this appeared in a press release. It appeared in a series of legal filings that were accurate, thorough, and entirely without drama. This was how Diana Chen preferred her problems to resolve themselves, correctly and without an audience. Dmitry Volkov was the kind of man who was afraid of being seen clearly. He should have been afraid sooner. 6 weeks after the Tuesday that had briefly ended and then resumed Marcus Hale's employment at Meridian Group, Thomas Whitfield's assistant sent a calendar invitation. Lunch, a restaurant in the West Loop that Marcus had heard of but never been to, noon on a Wednesday. Marcus arrived at 11:58. Thomas was already there at a corner table with a glass of water and the posture of a man who has made his peace with being early. They ordered, they talked. Thomas did not ask about the 41st floor kitchen or the vendor situation or Dmitry Volkov, though he was aware of all of it because men like Thomas Whitfield are always aware of everything relevant and never make a performance of it. He asked about Marcus's background. Marcus said, I was in logistics, then food services administration, then cooking. Thomas said, logistics for whom? Marcus said, the Army, and then a firm called Harrow. Thomas Whitfield set down his fork. He said, Harrow and Associates, the infrastructure group. Marcus said, yes. Thomas said, I know that firm. I sat on their advisory board for 3 years. They built the drainage remediation system for the South Shore. Marcus said, I know, I was on the project team. There was a pause. Thomas said, you were on the... He stopped. He looked at Marcus with a new geometry, the look of a man recalculating distances. What were you doing in their kitchen? Marcus said, learning. Thomas said, before the kitchen. Marcus said, planning, budget oversight, vendor systems, distribution logistics for the municipal contract in 2017, the one with the federal compliance issue. Thomas said, I remember that contract. It was a mess. Someone untangled it. Marcus said, it took a while. Thomas Whitfield looked at him for a long moment. He said, why are you cooking breakfast on the 41st floor? Marcus picked up his water glass. He said, my daughter is sick. The hospital is on the north side. The building is on the north side. The hours let me be there before 5. Thomas said, I see. He did say. He did not say he was sorry. He did not offer anything. He simply saw it the way a man who has made real decisions understands real decisions, not as tragedy but as architecture, as the structure of a life organized around what matters most. He said, "How is she doing?" Marcus said, "Better. Her last counts were the best in 18 months. Thomas said, "Good." The food arrived, they ate. Near the end of the meal, Thomas said, "When you have time, and I mean when you genuinely have time, not as a courtesy, I'd like you to look at something. A project. It involves food systems infrastructure for a large urban development. Schools, hospitals, municipal buildings. It needs someone who understands distribution, logistics, and food." He paused. He said, "Not to run it, not immediately, just to look at it and tell me what you see." Marcus said, "All right." Thomas said, "I'll send the files." Marcus said, "Send them on a Saturday. I read better on Saturdays." Thomas smiled again, the same private smile, the one for himself. He said, "Saturday then." They finished lunch. They paid Thomas this time without discussion. They stood outside on the sidewalk in the November cold. Thomas said, "One more thing, and I hope you'll take this in the spirit it's offered." Marcus waited. Thomas said, "Whatever you were before, whatever room you built, whatever system you designed, I don't imagine you'll spend the rest of your life making eggs. But I'd like to suggest that the way you make eggs is not a lesser version of whatever else you do. It's the same thing, it's the same care." Marcus said, "I know." Thomas said, "Good, some people have to be told." He got into the Navigator, the door closed, the car pulled away. Marcus stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He turned up the collar of his jacket against the cold. He looked at his father's watch. 1:17 p.m. He had a 3-hour window before the drive to Lurie. He walked back toward the parking structure. He walked with the particular gait of a man who knows where he is going and is not in a hurry about it. That Saturday the files arrived. He made coffee. He sat at his kitchen table under the topographic map of Chicago's water infrastructure. He opened the files. He read for 3 hours. He filled 7 pages of a legal pad with notes written in his precise, unadorned hand. Numbers, distributions, load points, gaps in the existing vendor structure that would create bottlenecks at scale. 2 systemic inefficiencies that someone had probably noticed and not corrected because correcting them required rethinking the contract architecture, which required someone to have done this before. He had done this before. He did not think about money. He did not think about titles or floors or windows. He thought about the problem, the specific shape of it, the way a complicated thing resolves when you strip it down to what it is actually asking. At noon he stopped. He made a second cup of coffee. Lily called from the hospital at 12:10. She was having a good day. Her nurse had taught her a card trick. She wanted to show him when he came in this afternoon. He said he'd be there at 4. She said, "Will you bring the Chekhov? I want to hear the one about the student." He said, "I'll bring it." She said, "Dad?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you for being there every day." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Where else would I be?" It was not a question. She laughed. It was the laugh of a 14-year-old girl who knows her father is telling the truth and finds this both obvious and remarkable. He hung up. He looked at the legal pad, at the 7 pages of notes, at the shape of the problem and the shape of its answer. He put the cap back on his pen. He folded his hands on the table. Outside, a November wind moved through the street. A branch scraped the window. Somewhere 2 floors below, a child was running in the apartment, feet on the floor, quick and light, back and forth. He sat in his kitchen with the particular stillness of a man who knows what he has and does not need to count it. He would write up the notes. He would send them to Thomas. He would go to the hospital at 4. He would read Lily the Chekhov story, The Student, the one where the young man realizes that pain and joy are not opposites but a continuity, that the same fire burns across centuries, that what you do for one person reaches further than you can see. He would go back to the 41st floor on Monday morning at 5:45. Not at 5:46, not at 5:44. He would tie his apron with the fold at the left hip. He would check the Miss C in place. He would have the first service components ready before anyone else arrived. He would do this because it was what the job required, and because the job, when done with full attention, was not a small thing. He would do it because Lily needed him whole. The math as always was simple. 3 months later, Whitfield Capital Partners announced the establishment of the Urban Food Infrastructure Initiative, a $200 million investment program targeting food distribution systems in public sector institutions across 5 Midwest cities. The announcement named Meridian Group as the anchor implementation partner. It named no individual consultant. Marcus Hale asked that it not. On the last Thursday of that November, Diana Chen stopped by the 41st floor kitchen before the morning service began. She did not have a meeting. She was not passing through. She brought nothing and asked for nothing. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Marcus was at the range. His back was to her. He was making hollandaise, which requires total attention and does not respond well to interruption. She did not interrupt. She stood there for a moment in the particular way of someone who has learned something they wish they had known sooner and has decided to simply know it now and let that be enough. Then she went back to work. The kitchen filled with the sound and warmth of a service beginning. Everything proceeded.